नदिय बिहारी गौर हरि सची माता प्राण धन गौर हरि विष्णु प्रिय प्राण धन गौर हरि जय सचिनंदन 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 गौर हरि गौर 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 हरि गौर 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 हरि हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे जय राधा नील माधव राधे नील माधव राधा जय गौरनिताय जय जय गिरिराज जय गोवर्धन गिरिराज जय गिरि जय राज निताय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल जय ओम नित्य लीलाओं विष्णुपाद परमहंस विचार जगत श्रीमद अवेचनारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्री प्रभुपाद की ISKCON BVT found Acharya His Divine Grace to save the whole world. Merciful Srila Prabhupada की जय ओम नित्य लीलाओं विष्णुपाद परमहंस विचार जगत श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी श्री प्रभुपाद की अवधूत कुलाचूड़ामणि गौर किशोरदास भोजी महाराज की सच्चिदानंद भक्ति विनोद ठाकुर की वैष्णव सार्वभौम जगन्नाथ दास भोजी महाराज की वृंदावन सड़ गोस्वामी प्रभु की नाम आचार्य हरिदास ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसदि गौर भक्तवृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की ब्रजभूमि वृंदावन धाम की मायपुर नवदीप धाम की पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की हरे कृष्ण धाम ह्यूस्टन की श्री श्री राधा नीला माधव की श्री श्री निताय गौर सुंदर की गिरिराज गोवर्धन की गंगा माई जमुना माई की भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की समवेद वैष्णव वृंद की हरिनाम संकीर्तन की हरे कृष्ण महामंत्र की जनिताय गौर सीतानाथ प्रेमानंदी All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories.
It's okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Vrajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Vrajajanaranjana Jamunatira Vana Chadi Jamunatira Vana Chadi Tira Vana Chadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Vrajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Vrajajanaranjana Jamuna Tira Vana Chadi Jamuna Tira Vana Chadi Tira Vana Chadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnu Mahamsa Parivajagacharya Astatara Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gora Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Canto 11, chapter 10. This is a negatives chapter about fruitive activities, the nature of fruitive activity. It's not a cheerleading section for fruitive activity. And we're reading verses 30 and 31. Lokanam lokapalanam madvayam kalpa jivinam brahmano pi bhayam mato dviparada. That's the day of Brahma is 2 paradas. It's a big number. Dviparada parayushaha. In all the planetary systems, from the heavenly to the hellish, and for all of the great demigods who live for 1,000 yuga cycles, there is fear of me in my form of time. Even Brahma, who possesses the supreme span of 100,000 million, billion, trillion, 311 trillion, 40 billion years, is also afraid of me in the form of death. Purport. There are many statements throughout Vedic literature proving that even the great demigods fear the time potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even in the heavenly planets, there is no relief from the miseries of material life. No conditioned soul can live eternally, as clearly demonstrated by the deaths of Hiranyakashipu and other demons, since even the demigods fear the time potency of the personality of Godhead. One may easily conclude that Krishna is the absolute truth and that he is eternally the supreme controller of everything and everyone. Lord Krishna is the only real shelter. That's text 30. And here's text 31. The material senses create material activities, either pious or sinful, and the modes of nature set the material senses into motion. The living entity, being fully engaged by the material senses and modes of nature, experiences the various results of fruitive work. And this is the nature of fruitive activity. That's the chapter. Here's the purport. It has been explained in the previous verses that the living entity, under the control of fruitive activities, is pushed down into a hellish condition of life. In this verse, the exact nature of the living entity's dependence on fruitive activities is described. One can observe that one's activities are performed by the material senses, and that the living entity himself is merely conscious of such activities. One may be worshipping the demigods, enjoying sex, or performing agricultural or intellectual activities, but in all cases, the material senses are performing the work. Paragraph. One may argue that the spirit soul initiates the activities of the senses and thus is the ultimate doer, but such false egotism is neglected in this verse by the statement guna srijanti karmani guno nushrajati ganan. The 3 modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, stimulate the functions of the material senses, and the living entity, coming under the control of a particular mode of nature, merely experiences the good and bad results of his work. This does not negate the concept of free will, since the living entity chooses to associate with different modes of nature. By one's eating, speaking, sexual activities, occupation, etc., one associates with various modes of nature and acquires a particular mentality, mind. But in all cases, the modes of nature themselves are acting, not the living entity. It's important understanding from Bhagavad Gita and here. The word asau in this verse indicates that the living entity falsely considers himself to be the performer of work carried out by nature, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 3:27. Famous verse. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. Kartaham iti manyate. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities, which are actually carried out by nature. The conditioned soul can be liberated simply by giving up this false egoistic conception of life and taking to the devotional service of the Lord, by which the living entity or marginal potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead escapes the disturbing influence of the external potency called Maya. In the devotional service of the Lord, the liberated entity realizes his actual form of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. The final paragraph. It is natural to perform activities with a desire to achieve a good result. The best results, however, can be attained when one who engages in the devotional service of the Lord with a desire to be reinstated in his constitutional position as the Lord's loving servant. In this way, the tendency to exploit one's own activities for a particular result can be purified. Then, the modes of nature and the material senses will no longer engage the living entity in illusion. The living entity is by nature blissful, and when his illusion ceases, all suffering comes to an end. The liberated soul is then fit to reside in Vaikuntha, the kingdom of God. It's natural. There's always these promises of something really nice on the other end of transcendental life, and somehow we continue to struggle. Most of us, at least. And the struggle is the same struggle. The struggle has to do with misdirected desire, misdirected free will that drives desire, the modes of nature and time that moves material nature to enjoy. But, the clause that's really important here is independently of Krishna. So the fruitive activity, in one sense, is quite natural for those who want to be happy, and that's everybody wants to be happy. But it's misplaced desire for happiness. It's thus fruitive activity. So say it again. It's quite natural. There's nothing unwholesome with the desire to get a good result from your activity, but it's misplaced. Because the good result, even because the previous verses yesterday morning, even up to the heavenly planets, or the first verse for this morning, up to the heavenly planets, up to the beyond the heavenly planets, the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, where the duration of life is far greater than in the realm of the demigods, far greater. But the time energy is operating, and there's that senses meeting sense objects kind of happiness is going to be taken away, and thus fear. So it's in that sense, the senses meeting sense objects, and there's a buzz. That buzz is called happiness, is not really happiness. We heard this yesterday. It is consistently compared to a mirage. The classic mirage example is water seen in a desert. Deserts, by definition, are places without water. That's a desert. But the reflection of the sunlight on the silicon of the sand may look like water. At a certain angle, at least, it looks like water. And so one is lured further and further into the desert to get water that doesn't exist, and expires in the desert for lack of water. Similarly, the pursuit of happiness through fruitive activities is just like that. It's a mirage. It's something, and that sensation that one experiences, or at least aspires to experience, looks like happiness, and for some time may appear to be happiness, like the happiness in the heavenly realm. For some long time, the opulences, etc., looks like happiness. It's not real happiness. It's not real happiness. And in addition, the pious activities that gives one that sense of illusory happiness, when expired, one comes back and experiences another birth, etc. So the cycle of birth and death is there's a nice saying in the Bhagavatam, as long as, I can't recall the place where it's described, several places most likely, as long as one continues to desire to enjoy happiness in the material world, guaranteed is one is going to suffer. As soon as one gives up the idea of trying to find happiness in the material world, one can experience real happiness. One can experience, we heard yesterday, one can experience knowledge, and through that accessing knowledge into the realm of transcendence, one can experience real happiness. The problem is not desire. It's misdirected desire. The modes of nature influence according to one's association with the modes of nature. One finds this or that or the other thing as the object that is meant to bring happiness, and we call that happiness. The person in the mode of ignorance finds happiness in ignorant activities. Listing to say that the four regular principles are all on the platform of ignorance. People that gamble, people that take alcohol and cigarettes and other, etc. This happiness, what allures them further and further is a false sense of happiness in the mode of ignorance. That's, human species and animal species also. The pig, Prabhupada would like to speak about the hogs, finding happiness in eating stool. It's abominable, but that's their happiness. In villages, it's quite common. They're hogs, and they're searching for stool, and when they find stool, their little tail goes like this. They're like, yummy. Stool. Fresh stool. Yummy. So, without elaborating, mode of passion has its objects. Mode of goodness has its objects. And there's mode of goodness within the mind and mode of goodness within the intelligence, influencing by art and music and poetry and philosophy, and there's a happiness. At least the appearance of happiness, that the appearance of such appearance of happiness covers the real happiness. That's unfortunate, but it looks like happiness, and so one chases it, and one does the activities according to the modes of nature. And in this way, this is fruitive activity. You do something to get something. And that's something that one wants naturally is happiness. In one sense, that's life, or that's okay. But from a transcendental sense, and this is Krishna speaking to Uddhava. Uddhava is a qualified person. Uddhava is a great, most exalted devotee of Krishna. So it's not that he doesn't know these things, but he's then reinforcing, as Scripture will do, it reinforces the platform of transcendence by taking a look at if you're not situated in transcendence, what do the other options look like? And they're uninviting. When one understands the bare bones of material life, it's not so inviting. So one holds oneself apart from those activities. A couple more things I'd like to say from these verses. Mentioned yesterday, but here we go again. Bhagavad Gita is often described as the undergraduate, and the Bhagavatam is the graduate study. So what is learned in undergraduate school doesn't change in graduate study. 2 + 2 is still 4 in graduate school. But the understandings that are there in the undergraduate level become expanded upon in the graduate level. And so some of the same understanding, according to Baladev Vidyabhusan's commentary on Bhagavad Gita, which Prabhupada largely followed, there are 5 main subject matters, and we're hearing about them. Time, karma, the living entity, the supreme, and material nature. 5. So material nature implies the 3 modes because material nature moves by the 3 modes. And time moves activity and the modes of nature. The time keeps the machine moving. And so there's 3: material nature, time, and karma. Then there's the living entity and the supreme. So everything comes down to living entity's regard for the supreme and how they're considering what happiness is in relation to the supreme or otherwise. And the otherwise is fruitive activity. And that's not a good choice. The whole chapter is, there's several places in the Bhagavatam where it's elaborately explained. Here's one of them. Another real nice one. Really nice one. Very elaborately explained by Jad Bharat to King Rishabdev. It's like, it's intense. Jad Bharat has been through a lot, practically put to death by some wild people. He was saved. And he was being insulted and abused by the king. And for some reason, Jad Bharat, who never spoke anything intelligible, gave this long dissertation to the king, explaining transcendental knowledge. So part of explaining transcendental knowledge is to explain it's compare and contrast. It's a teaching methodology. To understand this, you understand what this isn't. So that's what this section is. And so we're hearing about time and how time influences everyone in the material realm, but that time is not only is Krishna's energy, Kala Shakti, but Krishna says, time I am. Time I am. Just yesterday, it's just an example, for example. Yesterday evening with the devotees from China, we had this nice discussion on chapter 73 of Canto 10. So here's a little overview of chapter 73 of Canto 10. The whole chapter is 20,800 kings who were imprisoned by Jarasandha with the plan that he, Jarasandha, was going to make a human sacrifice to Lord Shiva. So they appealed through a messenger who went to Dwarka and appealed to Krishna, please rescue these kings. So to rescue the kings, there's many other parts to this, but Jarasandha had to be done away with. So the previous chapter, he was done away with by Bhima in a very creative way. When Jarasandha was finished, Krishna didn't want the kingdom. He gave the kingdom, he enthroned the son. Sahadev was the son's name. Sahadev became the next king of Magadha, which is in today's Bihar. And then Krishna went to the prison and released all the prisoners. And they said they offered prayers to Krishna. They're emaciated, tattered clothes, neglected. They looked like prisoners, although they were kings. And on this topic of time, they said, we don't hold any animosity, any ill feeling towards Jarasandha for two reasons. Because of Jarasandha, now we're meeting you. Most likely it would not have happened, but now it has happened. So we're not feeling ill feelings towards Jarasandha for imprisoning us and taking away our kingdoms. And the second is, they said, it was actually the loss of our kingdom, the fall from that power position that we had as kings and all of our opulence and this and that, was you in the form of time. In the form of time, by your mercy, you took away everything, because those everythings would have been taken in time anyways. You just wound the clock faster, and everything is taken from us by you, by the influence of time. So one can say the modes of nature and karma, because that verse is quoted here in the purport. The foolish people think that they're doing things, but actually things are being carried out by material nature, and specifically that means the modes of nature. And what moves the modes of nature? It's time. Think about our lives. Whatever it is that we were doing before today, before connecting with devotional service, it's the laws of material nature moving under the force of time. We were doing something and thinking something and trying to build happiness for ourselves by some activities in forgetfulness of Krishna, and we're just being carried along by the current of time, not knowing that that's what was going on, thinking we're creating a vision and some activities that are meant to bring happiness. And at least, by some good fortune, the opportunity for devotional service has come along, and now at least we're being given the opportunity to understand that's not really what's going on. This is the topic I want to speak about. That this follow-up point is how time energy is moving everything. And the kings said, your time energy is invincible. No one can stop it. The death will come whenever it comes, and the death of things in between now and then, to whatever we have that was our opulence and our position of power and all those things. Those are your energies. You bestowed them and you took them, and it's your prerogative. And not only you took them, which made us very humbled, but you gave us your association. You came to us in the prison. Now, it can be the prison of material existence or a literal prison, the prison of Jarasandha. But you came to us in the prison. And not only you freed us from prison, you freed us from the shackles of thinking that happiness is having power, opulence, position, rulership over other people. That's all illusory. You took it from us. Thank you. This is the force of time. And now, instead of the force of time taking things, you're standing before us. They gave a description of what they saw before them. Beautiful form. A four-armed form of Krishna. I did some further research on this. The four-armed form that Krishna showed to them, based upon where the symbols of Vishnu are in his hands, the description from Scripture says it was Adhoksaja, who's a Leela expansion of Krishna. A Leela expansion of Krishna, of Vasudeva Krishna. The second is Purushottam, just like in Jagannath. He's known as Purushottama. The Lord that manifesting all opulences in Dwarka and in Jagannath Puri. And here he's manifesting the form of Adhoksaja. It's Krishna's expansion. And he's showing this expansion form to the kings. You liked opulence. Here's opulence. The opulence of the Supreme that knows no limits and is not temporary. So who in the world, everyone in this world, is attracted to opulence? So Krishna is the all-opulent. He's all-attractive. He showed his form. Now, instead of the form of time, which takes away everything, you're showing us this form of Adhoksaja. Out of Krishna's kindness, the section of that chapter says, Krishna allowed them, all 20,800 of the kings, to place their head at Krishna's feet. They placed their head upon Krishna's feet. Their material desires were gone. And when material desires are gone, what's left? Spiritual desire. They continued to live. Krishna arranged for them to return after being respected by Sahadev and all of the followers, the former followers of Jarasandha are now under Sahadev. They respected all these 20,000 kings, fed them nicely, clothed them nicely, ornamented them, gave them many gifts, etc., and sent them back to resuming their position of kings. But now they're pure devotee kings. The same opulence, the same big seat, the same everything. But being blessed by Krishna to have constant remembrance of him. Fantastic. That's their lives are now perfect. And he was instructing them to live your lives, carrying out your duties, create progeny, continue the lineage of kings, and take care of all of your citizens as I have taken care of you. Protect them and give them bhakti as I have given to you. And at the end of your life, you'll come to my eternal abode. Shukadeva Goswami is narrating this, and he's like flabbergasted. He's ecstatic. How kind. What kindness Krishna gave to the destitute kings. To go from riches to rags, that's a free fall. Some people don't even live when they lose all their opulence. The kings regained their opulence, but without the desire for that opulence. Pretty amazing. And pure devotees that are guaranteed by Krishna that they would always remember him, have newer and newer realizations, and come to him at the end. And in between, protect, and distribute bhakti freely to all your citizens. So, time energy works to destroy, but that same time energy in the life of a devotee works the opposite. It restores as time passes, performing bhakti. The bhakti itself restores our rightful position in the spiritual realm. That time becomes eternal time. Because actually time is eternal. It's not this past, present, future time that exists here. That's what mercy to receive bhakti. And then, so if once one understands how valuable the gift of bhakti is, cherish it. You put it in a very safe place because it's the most valuable thing. And not just look at it, but use it. Prabhupada describes that a miser is one who likes to look at his money. He counts his money and he doesn't use his money, he just likes to have it. And a brahmana is one who uses whatever he receives, he uses it in service to Krishna. This is the life of devotion to Krishna. Shri Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. So that's a little description about the force of time, or the influence of time, or the feature of time. That if one is not, there's positive, negative. If one is not in the position of an intimate relationship with Krishna, then time, which takes away all things, including life itself, death, time is the feature of death for all things material, then it's feared. And if one is in devotion to Krishna, then time is something that's extremely valuable because it provides opportunity for devotional activity instead of fruitive activity. It's the same time, but it works in different ways depending upon devotion or the absence of devotion, the shelter of Krishna, or the absence of the shelter of Krishna. So this whole chapter is Krishna explaining to Uddhava about what happens when shelter in Krishna is absent. Then it's fruitive activities time. One other point, and I'll end. One other point is, according to the position of the planets within the universe, there's modes of nature that are more prevalent. In the bottom region, ignorance is more prevalent. In the middle region, passion is more prevalent. In the higher regions, goodness is more prevalent. So we're in the middle region, Bhu Mandala region, and that means passion is prevalent. That means fruitive activities are driven by passion. Kamesha, Krodesha, Rajoguna Samudbhava. Rajoguna, the mode of passion, drives fruitive activity. So naturally, there's abundant explanation in scriptures about fruitive activity, because that's the place. That's the carrot, that's the lure that keeps people going, 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 going. During the question and answer session last night from the Chinese audience, one devotee gave this elaborate what if a presentation, the conclusion of which was, isn't it important to have wealth? Because the whole thing was, when there's attachment, undue attachment for wealth, problems, undue attachment to wealth results in many undesirable things, such as pride in one's wealth, and that brings fall down from that position. One does hurtful things and foolish things, bewildered by pride. Or as the saying goes, pride goeth before the fall. You've heard that one before? Pride goeth before the fall. Have you heard that before? It's a common saying. So, beware. Beware of pride. And beware of things that facilitate pride. So the explanation was, if you're not wealthy, if you are wealthy, then you can do many things in service of Krishna, and if you're not wealthy, people won't regard you very seriously. So get wealthy. Isn't that important? That was the question. Didn't give a long answer, but I said, when Prabhupada came to America, he didn't have wealth. He had nothing. But he came as a giver. Giver of what? Giver of Krishna Bhakti and knowledge of who we really are. And that's what he was pushing. In giving, not getting wealth. Seeing that, Krishna supplied so much wealth. So much wealth. So much wealth. But he wasn't enamored. He was knowing how to engage that wealth in Krishna's service, because he had no attraction for wealth. He had attraction for Krishna's service and giving Krishna's service to others. And by giving Krishna's service to others, then their misery can be finished and the real happiness can be awakened. That was the power that drove him forward. He was a giver. So he didn't have to think about, I got to get some wealth, because then people will listen to me. And without wealth, people won't listen. He didn't operate from that platform. And at the same time, he was wary of opulence. And therefore, he was very meticulous about how wealth or opulence of any kind is to be utilized. So that's one of the important, for people that are in this middle planetary region, clear understanding about this situation is real important. The pernicious effects of fruitive activities and the necessity of letting go, of finding happiness through fruitive activity or the fruits of activities and being the enjoyer of the fruits of activities. Wanting a good result? Fantastic. What's the good result? That's the question. And the dial has lots of options. And especially the modes of nature dial. So the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita again and again are encouraging us, dial Krishna's number. And when you've locked into Krishna's number, that is, the real success of your activity, smartavya satatam vishnor, vismartavya najatu chit. And all of the vidhis and nishedhas, the do's and the don'ts, they're kinkaras, they're servants of this one principle. Always remember Krishna. Never forget Krishna, which is possible when you become attached to Krishna. Maya sakta, mana partha, yogam yunjan varashraya. Such an important verse. 7.1 Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada spoke more on that verse than any other verse in Bhagavad Gita. Tells you something. It's an important verse. And so it's being taught here in an elaborate fashion in chapter 10. So let's see if there's some discussion. 8:20. Yes. Microphone.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you very much for this. It is very stimulating to my mind and reinforced my faith in a lot of things. Thank you so much. You mentioned something, looking at this verse, the senses are creating the activities and the modes are influencing the senses. And you also mentioned that time is moving the modes. So I was wondering if you could explain the parallels in the spiritual world. So the Jiva and Ishvara are there. Now we have the modes here that are impelling the senses to act, and we are creating karmas. And of course there's time factor. So as I understand, there are senses to the spiritual body as well, and there are activities going on in the spiritual world. So how do you draw parallels in terms of how it's going on?
The parallel, that's the bottom line of your question, is this is a perverted reflection. What you find here exists there. What you find there exists here. This is the perverted reflection of that. In the spiritual world, no modes of nature. Zippo. They're absent. But that's the reflection is the modes of nature looks like, according to the modes. But there's the correlation is the comparison, the connection, no modes. There are senses. However, in the spiritual atmosphere, the senses are 100% engaged in pleasing Krishna. And in the material atmosphere, the senses are 100% engaged in finding objects to gratify the senses. It's the mirror image, reflection image of the spiritual position. Here, there's forgetfulness of Krishna. In the higher modes, it gets closer to contemplation about, but not per se connection with, the personality of Godhead. And in the spiritual world, everything is connected to the consciousness sees everything connected to Krishna. So supposing somebody becomes a pure devotee, it's rare, but supposing somebody becomes a pure devotee, how do they see things of this world? They see it connected to Krishna, they see Krishna everywhere. There's no Maya. Even in this world. There's form, but there's no difference between the person and the form. And here there's a difference between form and the person, because the form here is just a covering, made of Prakriti, moved by the modes of nature, looking like the real thing, but in forgetfulness of the real thing. Like a mirage. There is water. There is such a thing. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. In the case of the pastime of the kings getting liberated after seeing Krishna, it seems that their material desires were completely vanquished, and that was, I'm just thinking it through, that's such a relief. So it seems to be they got the easy path out.
They got their what?
Easy way to get rid of the material desires.
Well, supposing that happened to you, would you call it an easy way?
I mean,
deprived of all your everything, your queen and your home, and you're tossed in prison, you're not fed properly, your clothes become tattered, and you become emaciated, scraggly guy. That's the easy way out?
No.
Now that didn't per se take away the material desire. That taught them a lesson of the false shelter of the temporary. Being deprived, at least the potential is there to teach one the lesson. That's not a place of shelter. Now, keep going.
Like in how do I get out of this material affinities from previous experiences?
Great question. And the standard answer is, by the bhakti process, two things. Like Shikshastaka, Chaitha Darpana Marjanam, the seat of reading happiness is available out there in the field of sense objects. The seat of that conception is the mind, and the bhakti process cleanses the mind. Moreover, in Kapila Dev's teachings, the bhakti process has the power, the Shakti, to dissolve the material mind. What a relief. No more material mind. But there, behind the material mind, there's the spiritual mind and spiritual intelligence, etc. So, the cleansing of the covering and the awakening of reality through the medium of the bhakti process. So your question, the answer to your question is, through the bhakti process, that can be dismissed, and it can be permanently dismissed as consciousness of Krishna awakens. Because if consciousness of Krishna doesn't awaken, it's going to reappear. Material tendencies will resurface. Guaranteed. Without actual happiness, the allure of material happiness will kick in again. So it's these two things. By the bhakti process, the cleansing and the awakening. And then further and further and further and further. Awakening has different levels or stages of completeness. Okay. Is that your question? You have more? You look like you got something more to say.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, like, does the proclivities, once we progress in bhakti, do we forget all those activities? Or
you may have remembrance of those activities, and as Prabhupada would say, as Jamunacharya prayed, his lips curl and he spits on the thought. So you may have remembrance, but like, how foolish I was. And that's what the kings, there's so many cases, that's what the kings say, that's what Muchukunda said when he was delivered by Krishna. What a fool. It's what Dhruva said, what a fool. So he remembered the foolishness of those desires. So remembering of those desires is like a bad dream. You don't try to go back to sleep and relive the bad dream. It's a bad dream. It's gone. And from that there's regret. I wasted this precious human form of life for so long. And then it increases the sense of gratitude unto the bhakti process and those who have helped you in the bhakti process, or help us, each of us. So gratitude grows, and detachment grows, even if there's remembrance of the past. Something else? Can you take the microphone back there?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In my own personal experience...
Louder.
Okay.
That's the easy way to make it louder. Just put it closer to your speaking part of the body.
Mm-hmm. So, when I started with Krishna consciousness, during the process I had this challenge of accepting Krishna as like time, death, mind, and everything, but with time, with devotee association, scriptures, and all kind of knowledge and experience in my personal life, in my environment and everything, then I realized that he's the cause of all causes. He's in the beginning, middle, and end, and it is what it is, and I have to accept it. But I had this, like a person who loves, who I look
Hold
for.
it closer again.
A person who loves, who I look forward to for love, and how can that person be responsible for death and all these creations like which we probably do not like to accept, like the karma process, material modes of nature. We all want to be good, good, good. But with time I accepted it, and it came, as you explained, like with Krishna consciousness, Krishna will reveal it, and we will have the answers to all those questions. And today I don't have those problems, but when I see my friends struggling through those things, which is actually becoming an obstacle for them to move on in their spiritual life, then I don't know what to do. Like when I read scriptures, I realize that I should be patient and I should only suggest them, but I should leave it to them because it is their spiritual growth. So I wanted to know, am I doing the right thing, or is that something different I can do?
My sense of what you just did is you threw 3 balls at me and said, catch. And it's hard to catch all 3. But if I just can focus on one of the 3, which is, what should you do to help persons that are close to you and you want to help, but they're struggling with something that seems to be an obstacle for them to take shelter of Krishna? What should you do?
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
the big one.
Yes.
Shri Shri Radha Nila Madhava. There's many ways to answer your question or respond to your question. And I'll give a quick answer that for something that can be really big. The first thing that you can do to help someone is to become pure. Because unless the heart is pure, you can't. You become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. The more you become pure, the more you're able. Krishna will give you the intelligence what to do, what to say, when to do it, how to say it, how to do it. Without purity, that's your first business in response to this question. Make your own heart pure as far as you can and keep going. A second is rescuer consciousness is false ego. You're not the savior. You're not meant to make circumstances other than what the circumstances are. Certainly you can do things, A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and in between. But one of the most important things is that you offer compassion and your willingness to be of service to them. You may not have a solution to the problem, but if they feel there's understanding of their situation, consistent, I'm not in a position to help you because I'm not the controller, but I care about you, and you're important to me. So that means that you're offering, and they can choose, they can say yes or no, but you're a place of shelter for them. Sure. The big mistake that happens when that sense of relationship is, you want to jump in and be the doer. Mm-hmm. You want to be the rescuer. Mm-hmm. Hold yourself back from that tendency. Extend care, naturally and transcendentally, without trying to fix the problem. And because then a third is understand what's the root. What's at the root? The root is they've turned their back to Krishna. Mm-hmm. When one turns one's back to Krishna, what happens? There's darkness instead of light. There's shadow instead of light. And that's the shadow stemming from turning their back to Krishna. So you have to be intelligent enough and caring enough and willing to be an instrument of Krishna enough that he'll give you intelligence how to remind them of Krishna. It's not easy, depends on the circumstance, but that's your mission. You're Krishna's instrument. The instrument is to remind people of Krishna. You can do that to the degree that you have that shelter. That's the purity part. And then Krishna will give you intelligence. Supposing you don't have much intelligence, you don't really know what to do. You pray to Krishna for intelligence. You pray to Krishna, I wish to be your instrument. Because I know that you care as I care. You're a million times more caring and more intelligent. Please give me the intelligence, and inspiration, how I can be of service to this person to help them remember Krishna and feel good about remembering Krishna. Mm-hmm. If you're carrying that disposition, that's going to help the other person more than, the rescuer consciousness behaviors. Mm-hmm. You'll be better at reminding them of Krishna. And when they're on the other side of that difficulty, whatever that looks like, they'll have some remembrance of Krishna in their heart through you being the agent.
Thank you.
This topic that you just brought up is a topic that we're going to be coming 3 weeks. There's going to be a group of 100 totally new people that are Body, Mind, Spirit is the title of the thing. This topic is the topic for one of the classes. And there's 2 other presenters. Anyway, so I'll send to somebody. I'll send to you the presentation that I'm doing. I didn't create it. Someone created it, and I'm going to be presenting it on this topic. You can forward to her. She can take a look at it and get a clue on what position you can take when you're trying to help people who are struggling with obstacles, and it looks to you like it's an obstacle for them to take shelter of Krishna. Now, the language is going to be different because this is like totally new people. But that's just the principles don't change. Okay. You have something?
Maharaj, you talked earlier about, mirage and chasing after wealth. My problem oftentimes is not about chasing after wealth or anything like that, but something related to that is where it's about